Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Blue is the New White podcast. Today's guest is an interesting one. As you all know, I usually talk to blue-collar tradespeople or advocates, but my definition of the skilled trades extends far beyond that. Basically, anything that requires some form of formal education that isn't a typical four-year college. So I sit down today with Mike Roberts, a 32-year veteran in software coding and founder of the San Diego Code School. Mike had an interesting journey to get to where he is today, mainly coding as a hobby. He went to college for accounting, although by his own admission probably spent more time DJing, but it wasn't long before he realized that accounting was not his idea of success. After jumping from job to job after college, he found his way back to the tech space and built his own success around that. This episode switches from blue collar to new collar and shows you yet another career path that can also be considered a skilled trade. Listen and learn all about what options are available to those who want to be in software development and what a career in this path looks like. As always, this show's not monetized and we don't run ads. We rely strictly on word of mouth from our listeners to further the mission. So if you enjoy this episode, please take a moment to rate it, review it, and share it. The future generations of tradespeople depend on it. They depend on you. So thank you again, and enjoy this episode of the Blue is the New White podcast with Mike Roberts. Mike, welcome to the Blue is the New White podcast. So happy to have you here today.
Thanks, Josh. Happy to be here.
All right, so I know that you guys just heard this in the intro, but I'm super excited about this episode. Mike fits a little bit outside of our normal realm of blue-collar workers, but still inside the realm of the skilled trades. So we're going to talk to him today about coding and everything that he is and does. So Mike, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience? Tell us where you're from, who you are, what you do.
Sure. So again, Mike Roberts. I am the founder of San Diego Code School. I was born in Boston, but I'm a transplant to San Diego. I've been here for quite some time. So this is the new home. Although it's nice to go back during the winter and see the snow and not have to shovel it. And I can just then come back to San Diego and have the rest of the nice holidays. So I've been writing software for about 32 years. I think back when I was a teenager, that's when I got started. And for most of my life, I did it as a hobby and didn't realize that I could get paid to write code. So that was a pretty impressive opportunity when I suddenly realized I get paid to do this. Wait, what? And then it was real fun because then software engineers, for those that aren't familiar with what it takes to make the devices on your application on your phone work or websites, writing software is what makes all those things happen and work. And software engineers get taken care of pretty well. We usually get the dogs in the office and the catered breakfast and lunch, and unlimited PTO, massages and haircuts in the office.
Beanbag chairs too, right?
Beanbag chairs and all that good stuff. Ping pong tables in the lobby. So real work hard, play hard type environments, typically.
Very, very cool. I spent most of my life in Kenosha, Wisconsin, so I'm familiar with the cold weather. And now I'm out here in Arizona, and just like you, it's nice to visit, nice to see the snow. Better not to shovel it.
Yep. It's like a little novelty. Oh, look at this.
Absolutely. So you've been writing software for 32 years. That is amazing. So did you go to college?
I did. So I was on the 10-year plan. So both my parents are school teachers, so they were quite disappointed in my performance in school. But I started at San Diego State. I spent 6 years at San Diego State, just trying to discover who I was at that time. And I was more of a DJ than I was a student. So I was having a lot of fun and not super sure what I wanted to do at that point. And so after spending 6 years there, I took some time and did a variety of different jobs, like all kinds of things, from school bus driver to soccer referee. It was all over the map, right? But the one thing that was always there, even when I was thinking I was going to be a professional DJ, was still writing software as a hobby, pastime. And I eventually afterwards ended up getting a bachelor's degree in computer science, but it was not a traditional route by any means.
Okay. So is computer science what you went for the first time?
No, I was encouraged not to do that by one
Wow.
of my two parents. And they were just like, that's not a great, no one goes to college to become a programmer. And this is not that long ago. This was like in 94.
Sure.
And so I was like, all right, well, how about like accounting then? Like, yeah, that sounds good. Like, all right, I guess I'm going to be an accountant.
That's a far cry from
It
programming.
is. Well, I mean, it was first was like business, and they were like, okay, what do you want to do in business? And I was like, I don't know, maybe accounting. Like numbers are okay. But then when I took my first like upper division class in accounting, or at least when I showed up for the first day, they're like, this is what we're going to do this semester. And it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done in your life. And like, this is how we weed people out of the accounting program. I was just like, yep, well, you've weeded me out. Thanks. See ya.
Oh, that's
So,
funny.
it was interesting taking sort of like the, just the basic accounting classes. But when we got to like the serious stuff, I was just like, nah, this isn't fun anymore.
Yeah.
So I still wasn't convinced yet. So I didn't just like change my major to computer science. I was just at that point trying to figure out like, how do I, like, I've got all these units now. What's the shortest path for me to just be done with this? And eventually just petered out and was just like, I cannot do this. Then when I finished, I actually finished by taking some certification exams. So that was a little life hack. I found that there's a college that would give credits for taking like Microsoft certification tests and A plus and CompTIA. So these are all certifications that a lot of people in IT think is like the path to getting a job. For me, none of those certificates actually ended up landing me a job. So I kind of got sort of bummed out on the idea that like they're pitching all these certifications, but they don't actually lead to employment for a lot of folks. But it did lead me to get the units that I needed to finish my bachelor's degree. And that was a major accomplishment, enough of an accomplishment that then I went and got my master's degree right afterwards. So within a year of getting my undergrad, I got my master's in management. And by then I was starting to feel like maybe I could do some side projects and use some of this like coding skill that I have as like a side hustle. And the next thing I know, I was like running my own agency and like, as an entrepreneur at that point, and just like everything sort of like took off.
Wow. That's cool. That's a cool story. Do you feel like and do you feel like the experience that you gained in college, that the ROI was there for you in what you ended up doing? You understand what I mean by that?
I do. And no, I think I wouldn't, I would, if I had the opportunity to, like, I got a kid, right? He's 12. So if he wants to go to college, I definitely think that that's an awesome opportunity and he should take advantage of that college experience, especially at that age where you get that independence and you're getting some structure. But if he says, he wants to get a liberal arts degree, be like, cool, that's what you want to do. I don't know that's going to directly translate into a job. Now, when he has that conversation with, he's like, this is what I want to do. Then I feel like I'm in a great position to say, here's all the life hacks for you to get there the most efficient way as possible and without a bunch of debt. And if it's computer science, if he wants to be an engineer, wants to get into robotics, whatever it is, I would most likely tell him, don't use the college experience as the only route for you to have success there. Like there are way other like better and more efficient ways. If you just want to go and do that and you would like to forego the college experience, if you're just not interested in it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to parent. I think there's a lot more people nowadays coming around to that idea, because back in the day, when I grew up, and I know when you grew up, that wasn't the narrative, right? It was hey, you've got to go to college. It doesn't matter if you don't know what you want to do. You got to go to college anyway, and you'll figure it out there. And people now, so more than then, they don't talk about the type of debt that's accumulated or can be accumulated through the college experience. So it sounds like you have the right mindset there, which is absolutely awesome. And I think more kids need to be taught that. I want to talk a little bit about the computer science thing. And forgive me, I don't know much about this field, so you'll have to kind of educate me a little bit. But
Sure.
I know a lot of people go to school for computer science because they want to do something in technology. Is that right?
Yeah. And I think also they have a goal in mind of working in a particular type of like organization or lifestyle, like I just described, like with all the fancy stuff. And so they first set their goal on that. Like, I don't know what it means to be an engineer, but I know I want to work at Google or Amazon or Apple or, one of those organizations. And so the prescribed route to get into those organizations is usually a CS degree. So it's kind of like, I guess I got to do this because it's the prerequisite to get into these top organizations. For those that really, in my mind, like we call them coders, those people that are real coders, they are just looking at this like, okay, well, this is just a quick path. But the reality is they aspire to build things. They aspire to be creative. They aspire to understand how to solve problems and fix things for companies. And so for them, they just got it as another problem. Like the problem is I want to get into this organization. So I guess I got to go to this school and get the top grade so that I'll be recruited and then go to the internship. And so they've got it all mapped out and they're using it as like, this is a problem solving mechanism. This is what they want. This is what I do. And, those are the folks that are super good engineers. Like they've engineered their career path.
Interesting. That's a very interesting way to look at it. Now, I've heard that when it comes to technology and computer science and stuff like that, that sometimes the college curriculums, because they have to go through so many different approval processes before they actually make it into the hands of the students, are often, because of how quickly technology is moving, outdated by the time the kids are taught or the young adults are taught. Is that what you've typically seen as well, or?
Oh, absolutely. So when graduates come, recent college graduates come onto the campus of a large size software engineering firm, it's like they've got to start at square one and they've got to be taught a lot of the fundamentals of what it actually takes to be successful on the job. And the big organizations have they've got a factory learning and development process and program that they run folks through. So what they're hoping to do is isolate, first of all, candidates that they think they attribute. If you've graduated from a top school and you're one of the top students, then you will be able to succeed within our organization. So they don't so much care that you're really good with algorithms. They're asking you if you're good with algorithms because they want to make sure you're paying attention in your class and you can get through the rigors of what they're going to do. And so they use some of those as just signals to see, is this a candidate that we're going to be able to develop? They have no expectation that person is going to come in and be a contributor. Right? They know it's going to take a long time for them to contribute code. So they're thinking about what are the signals that this will be a person that will be great and we're willing to invest in. But they recognize that the curriculum that they're going through is completely disconnected from what skills it takes to be successful early on. In many cases, they graduate from college, they've never used something called version control. So that's what we use in software engineering to make sure that more than one person can write the same piece of code at the same time, right? So otherwise you have no way of knowing who made this mistake and when did they make it and how does what you've written integrate with what I've written. And so when you're in college, you get to write things in isolation. When you work in a large scale software engineering firm, you're working with hundreds if not thousands of other developers and you have literally never exercised the skill of working on a group. This isn't like working on a group when you're in high school where you're pasting stuff together. This is working on a group where it's your work has to integrate with dozens of other systems.
Yeah. Holy cow, that is wild. So these companies, these larger tech companies, if you will, they almost use, it sounds like from what you're saying, they use a degree as almost like an aptitude test of some kind. If they have the degree, that means they've gone through the rigors, not necessarily learned the information they need to learn to work here.
Right. And so it's a good way to identify if the individual has some of the fundamentals of how do you make decisions? How do you approach problem solving? What are some algorithms that you've learned? What are some factory patterns that you can apply when you're on the job? But the actual mechanics of writing clean code, that's code that's easy to maintain and easy for other people to understand as humans. That's a skill that just takes experience. It takes writing lots and lots of code. And so they don't spend as much time in college doing that. And instead they spend more time working through the academic side of what does it take to think about problems, all that kind of stuff, which is useful. Mm-hmm. Don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. It's useful. It's just you don't apply much of what you learned in computer science in the early part of your career. It kicks in a little bit later when you're working a little bit more autonomously and on your own. But initially, they're going to have to put you through just the fundamentals of like, here's how we write our code, and here's how our teams work, and here's how our business works, and all those kinds of things. So there is a big disconnect. And it's, to be fair, it is exactly as what you described. Because it is an accredited institution, to maintain their accreditation, they have to have this level of oversight so that the curriculum has to go through multiple layers of approval, and it can never work at the speed of what technology is evolving at.
Yeah.
Right. And so for technology careers, I worry that we are not doing a good enough job of making some accommodations to keep up with technology if we want to sustain this like sort of two-pronged approach. You've got the folks that have lots of lived experience and are good software engineers because they've just written a lot of code. And then you have these fresh graduates that are learning really old programming languages and some of the core parts of thinking, but they are in no way ready for what they see when they get inside the shop.
Wow, that's amazing. You know, and it's funny, as you're talking, I'm drawing associations to the other skilled trades that I usually talk about, being a mechanic or technician or what have you. And I'm just seeing all of these fundamental transferable skills, if you will. I mean, these things that I normally talk about on a physical level, kind of being talked about here now on a mental level with what it takes. Like you mentioned, problem solving and creativity and the opportunity to build something. That is something that I typically talk about on this show, except, by use of hands. That's what the skilled trades are in the blue collar world, is, manufacturing and construction and things like that. But I'm seeing that it's one and the same, and hopefully my listeners are seeing that too, and beginning to understand why I asked you to come on the show, because in a sense, and we're going to get to this in a minute, but what you've built and this field in particular can be considered a skilled trade in not by the definition that people most know it by, but by the actual definition that I follow. So that leads me to my next question for you. What alternatives do people have if they want to get into, if they want to have a career in coding without going to college? Is that possible?
Oh, absolutely. So I run across lots of engineering managers and super seasoned senior people in organizations, and they'll sort of like whisper, like, I never went to college, right? Or they'll say, I don't have a degree. And it's almost like admitting like this big, falsehood that you have to have that to get into the space. These days, it's a lot of organizations are really discerning, and they'll use that as the barrier, and they'll say, we just don't want to talk to as many people. Like, we can just like weed off people that don't have a bachelor's degree. Just weed them off. Then we don't have to talk to as many people. And I literally will have people say that, like, if we don't have a degree, there'll just be so many more people applying for the job. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of a good thing.
Isn't that the point? Yeah, that's you want the best of the best, right? I mean,
yeah. So it is entirely possible. And here's an interesting like facet, and people sometimes realize this and sometimes they don't. Developers that are self-taught, and there's a myriad of resources now online that you could use. It's a little tough because it's like you're drinking out of a fire hose. There's so much information online about how to do this that it can take you a really long time to sort of weed through it without a curated path of like, here's actually what you need to learn. So what you'll find is self-taught engineers have these really interesting, like, deep knowledge areas where you're just like, how do you know that? Like, you learn this on your own. Why do you know so much about, something like software testing? Like, why do you know so much about software testing? And they're just like, well, I didn't know when to stop. So I just kept learning like this thing until like I couldn't find anything else new. And then I moved on to something else. And so they have these weird places in their experience where they're really good at things that you just like, I don't know anybody else that knows this much about that thing. Like, why do you know so much about this particular like feature of software engineering? So it's entirely possible. It does require a lot of persistence, and it's the best way to describe it is kind of like playing an instrument. It requires a lot of muscle memory. It requires a lot of time for things to kind of sink in for you to be really good on your own. And a lot of people are not willing to, they'll start, they'll be interested in it, and they'll do lots of like starts and stops. because they get to a point where it's really hard to get an answer, or they get stuck and they're not sure what to do. And then they will pause for a little while and then come back to it. Those usually make really good candidates to go into the next way that people will usually approach it. So if they're not self-taught, they may go through like a structured immersive coding boot camp. Might be a great example of another way that you can enter the field. And so these cropped up about 10 years ago. We have lots and lots of them here in the US. Generally speaking, they cost between like $12,000 and $20,000, and you can complete them in like 4 to 6 months usually. And so that's a great opportunity for someone that's looking like a little bit more budget conscious, right? Because you're not spending $100,000 or $200,000 on a degree, and you're really focused on, in a short period of time, can I get all the skills I need for an entry level role? And then from there, sort of just like working a little bit harder than the person next to you to get, climb the ranks. And it means a lot more of those like filling in the gaps that you didn't have from a CS degree. But a lot of those resources are online. So you can take these amazing courses from like MIT and Stanford online. And that can help you fill in some of those computer science gaps. So it's really about, maybe blending the best of the two, blending some self-taught with some sort of a program, that will give you that curated path to get you there, is the second option. And then the third option that people will usually go to is they'll go off to a CS program and take a 4-year CS degree, or they might start at a community college, take some classes, and then transfer and finish a CS degree. And then there's apprenticeship. So that's the new one, right? Mm-hmm. And so in my opinion, apprenticeship is really where I think a lot of companies are eventually going to go. And the employer takes a much more vested interest in the development of someone. It's about identifying someone that has the aptitude and the passion for it, and then having the company sponsor a relationship where that person gets to work and learn from masters, from people that are real seniors.
And get paid at the same time.
Yeah, and get paid. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an important feature.
And that's the kicker, right? I mean, I relate it back to some of the topics that I usually talk about on this show. We talk about apprentices all the time. And oftentimes when somebody hears the term apprentice, they immediately think the skilled trades as far as blue collar work goes. I personally, and forgive me, like I said, I'm not super versed in this area, but when I heard apprentice, when I was talking to you, I never really made that association with coding. I didn't know that was a possibility, which I think that, I don't know how many people do know. Is that something that's relatively new, or has the apprenticeship route been around a little while?
No, it has not. And so it's interesting that when I say to people, I have a software engineering apprenticeship, they will often respond right back to me, oh, that's cool, you do internships. And I'm like, no, I didn't say that word. And so in technology, it's real common, and it's so common that people are somewhat familiar with the term apprenticeship, but they immediately think of what the common thing is in IT, which is internships. And so in their brain doesn't even process that this is similar to electricians and plumbers and carpentry, that this is a trade, and we're thinking about it that way. It just immediately goes to what they're most familiar with. And so, that's one of the reasons why we've tried to start using the word new collar to describe these careers, and to really make sure we're interrupting that and getting people to slow down and think, well, okay, wait, so how would that work in technology? It's pretty much the same way that it works in other apprenticeship patterns. You have some requisite education that they have to have so that they're safe to be working in the environment. And then you have them working in the environment and getting paid and getting reps and just getting more experience. And every scenario they see prepares them for more of that work down the road. And so it's not a common pattern, but it is a pretty amazing thing when I'm talking to someone that's interested in learning how to code, and then they find out like, wait, so I could get paid to do this? And then they're just like, how does that work? Right. Yeah. So it's not yet proven, but I'd like to prove that it's a more economical way for companies to attract and retain, especially diverse talent, right? So if they're looking to bring people into the organization and they're looking to not have attrition, well, how about investing in people that otherwise might not have an opportunity, training them, then they will remain loyal to you because you've given them this amazing opportunity. And so the money is usually invested in recruiting and then somewhat invested in learning and development. And my hypothesis is, and still to be sees that apprenticeship is actually maybe a cheaper route than some of the ways that they're acquiring talent from the 4-year university route.
I could see that. I could see that a lot. I compare it like we talked a minute ago about, you said there were boot camps, $12,000 to $20,000. You said between 4 and 6 months time frame.
Sure.
And I kind of relate that to trade school, because it's a similar thing. In this boot camp, I'm imagining that you can choose that route right after high school, if you so choose. And so what this does is you've got this 4 to 6 month training period, and then you get to find an entry level job and start getting paid. But then you have to subtract the debt that you would have accumulated in college over the course of 4 years, and then multiply that by 3, because now you have a head start over those who did go to college. So by the time you hit year 4, whether you went to college or whether you went through this boot camp, or what I imagine would be an even more lucrative route if you went through the apprentice, and see where those pay scales are, and where you are in your career based on each one, that, a boot camp or an apprenticeship would be more efficient in several ways.
Oh, by far.
Yeah.
And I think you hit the nail on the head with that first piece, which is, if I take someone that graduates from high school and enroll them in college, we don't see them for 4 years, right? So they're not on the market for 4 years. Meanwhile, if I take someone, put them through 6 months of training, which you could do over the summer after you graduate, and before that person even starts school, they could be on the job and they could be earning. And imagine 4 years of software developing compared to someone that's still in school. 4 years down the road, you're a decent level mid engineer, and mid-level engineer in most markets in the US is knocking on the door 6 figures. They're in the high 90s, maybe just at 100 grand. And then once you make it to senior, which you could be 1 or 2 years away from, meanwhile this person's just graduating and just coming into the organization, now the sky's the limit. Once you're a senior, salaries in the US can range anywhere from $125 to, some engineers in Silicon Valley are making between $200,000 and $300,000.
Wow, that is absolutely amazing.
And top end engineers, like principal, what they call distinguished software engineers. So when you've been in the game for 15, 20 years, then you can start getting into like the $1 million salaries, $1 million a year.
Gosh.
To be a line level employee, this is not like a leadership role. This is like, you're just one of the top folks at some of these organizations, Netflix, and all the big names. That
is unbelievable, and I think that's really important for anybody to hear that has an interest in this kind of thing in high school. I was very, very into computers and stuff like that in high school. I decided to take a different route, but had I known that apprentices or even boot camps existed for that kind of thing, honestly, I may have thought about that very, very, very hard, especially knowing, what you can look at top end. I mean, that's a huge draw. And I relate it to again, the other trades that I typically talk about, because, even in the blue collar world, a lot of these trades that people don't often know can be so lucrative really are. But what I like to do is, whether it's in coding, like with you, or with mechanics or anything like that, the money is a hook, right? That's what gets people interested. Sure. Because, who doesn't want to be wealthy? I mean, that's just, that's definitely a perk. But then you get past that, right? And you find out what really retains people. And, in the skilled trades, it's a lot of different things. It's, for blue collar stuff, it could be travel, it could be the satisfaction of being able to step back and see what you've built, which I imagine is the same in coding, because, you're going through probably thousands and thousands of lines of code, and you can finally step back and actually see your software in action and see it work. Not to mention, you guys have the cool beanbag chairs, ping pong tables, snack walls.
All that good stuff. No, I 100% agree. I think the interesting thing is for the people that are purely in it for the money, they purely think like, hey, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to make so much money and this is going to be, and then I'll explain to them, this is going to be really hard. Learning how to code is going to be the most difficult thing you've ever done in your life. And they're like, yeah, but I'll figure it out. I'll get through. They will never make it through. If their only motivation is to make a bunch of money, they never make it through the process of upskilling themselves to the point where they can actually, get a job. But on the other hand, people that love to solve problems, people that love to understand, people that love to build with their hands. I build with my hands. I just use my hands to click on the keyboard and build things in a virtual space.
Yeah.
But like we're still building and still solving real problems for businesses. If you can't do that, you don't have the capacity to like think creatively, and it's both an art and a science, right? So if you can't use that feature of your brain and instead you would prefer to do sort of like the same thing every day, software engineering is not right for you. But if you love being challenged and you love solving really hard problems, then sky's the limit, and organizations really love having you available as talent to solve their problems. Because at the end of the day, that's all we're doing. Like people that build, people in construction that are building buildings or, homes, they're just solving a housing need, right? They're building, somebody needs a structure, right? From my perspective, they usually don't need a house, but they might need like a digital property. They might need some way for them to sell goods online or to promote their business. It's the same thing. We start with the structure and we put up, the walls, and we get some infrastructure in place. And then we start making it look nice with paint and whatnot and like CSS and styling. Same fundamentals. So it actually is super interesting when people sometimes they get injured in the construction space or their body just starts to break down. They make really good software engineers, people that have been in the construction world and space, because they can think very quickly about like, okay, this is what it means to like lay the right foundation and quality. And this is how this relates. They have a lot of transferable skills. So
that's amazing.
You wouldn't think that, like from the outside perspective, you wouldn't think, but man, some of the best developers I've worked with, and they can really appreciate not having to work on a hot roof, right? And instead they're getting to work inside of an air conditioned building. They're like, yes, please. I'll take more of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's really a great association, and I love that about what you do. Just like I love it about the blue collar world as well, is that everything it's objective driven. It's not necessarily task driven. It's objective driven, which I imagine is a big reason for like the ping pong tables and all of that cool stuff, because it's not about what you can get done in an 8-hour time period, right? It's about what you get done when you complete it. This is your objective. This is the end goal. As long as you can do that, play some ping pong. Right?
And having the autonomy to like to have your CEO just come out and say, hey, here's the problem, and then everybody's like, all right, on it, we can fix that, right? And I used to love that when I had an uncle that was really good at fixing cars and fixing things, and it was always like, Uncle Eric can fix it, right? And so it's that idea of they are not expecting you to just do some thing for a certain amount of time. They're going to give you a problem, and if you solve it really quickly, great. Everybody can go home early for today. Like, we're good. We'll come up with a new idea to work on something else tomorrow. It's not we just got to keep everybody busy and keep everybody productive. It's, to your point, it's really redefining what success looks like.
Yes. No, and that's fantastic. And I'm going to get a little bit into that too, but I have a lot to say on the definitions of success and how each people have their own definition of success. And, that's how we have to live. One person's success is completely different than somebody else's success. And there's so many different trajectories that they can go down to actually achieve that, and it doesn't all have to fit into one neat little box, that somebody else determines as success for them. So I'm curious, your school, San Diego Code School, where does that fall in the realm of boot camp or apprenticeships? How do you bridge that gap?
That's a great question. So we started as an immersive coding boot camp. we started with the philosophy that we wanted to be able to keep the tuition affordable. And it was weird because there's this other constraint that I know about from my own experience in being in this space. That is that part-time programs don't really work that well, because this is really hard. And this is a kind of skill that you have to practice for a really long time to get good at. And a lot of the part-time programs, if you think about, what is it like to work a job that you really don't like for 8 hours and then study really hard for another 4 hours after that job, it's like a nearly impossible task. People do it, right? So, people go to law school at night and become lawyers. Like, it's possible. It's just exceedingly difficult. And learning how to code is already difficult. So I wanted to provide an environment where people didn't have to pay that much, right? And so our tuition was super low at the very beginning. It was like $2,500. And that was not only because I wanted to make it affordable, but it was also because the state required that we stay under a certain limit if we didn't get through certain licensing hoops. So we started super affordable, and we afforded a little bit more of a flexible schedule. So we started with Saturday and Sunday classes, and then individuals could come a couple more days during the week, and we would permit people to work part-time while they took our program full-time. The other way I just knew didn't work. It didn't work to take a programming class part-time and work full-time. Too demanding. But if we could structure it in such a way where they could get most of the work in the classroom on the weekends, and they could maybe wait some tables or work somewhere else part-time during the week, we could make it work. And so that's how we started. We ran it for about a year. And then, it just occurred to me that we still weren't seeing the demographic of folks that I wanted to see. We weren't seeing nearly as many people that look like me. So for those listening on the audio, I'm a Black male, 44 years old, right? And so when I walk into the shops, I don't see a lot of Latinx, Black, women, LGBTQ, neurodiverse. Like, it's just really hard to pick those folks out. And so I said, well, what if we took a look at our program and reimagined it from the perspective of our students? What would be the features that we'd want? Well, we want to figure out the employment situation. So it's like, is there a way we can pay? So we can pair students? And then I was like, wait, I know that exists. That's called apprenticeship, right? And so we basically converted our program from a tuition-based program and completely stopped charging tuition to now a apprenticeship pattern, where anybody that comes in and we hire them into the apprenticeship program, they get paid $18 to start. They get a raise at 6 months at $19, and then they get a raise to $20 after the first year. And they basically, from the very beginning, are paid software engineers learning the trade while we give them projects to work on. So we evolved our program, and my hope is that we could be sort of like a national model for other people to do the same, and for organizations to start doing this, to diversify their pipelines and see if they can provide an opportunity for people who otherwise probably wouldn't go to a boot camp or otherwise wouldn't go to a 4-year CS degree because there's just too many barriers in the way. If that makes sense. Yeah. So from my perspective, it's not only a really efficient way of training people, it's a way to create equity and opportunities for people who otherwise would just not have an opportunity to be in this space. Because, how many of us that are working that would like to transition into tech have 20 grand laying around to go to a program and can fly off and take a sabbatical and go to San Francisco for 4 months, right? It's just, It's kind of tough.
That's wild. That is really wild. So I'm trying to understand your model a little bit. So do you have companies that say partner with you and feed you different projects, and then you're able to bring on these apprentices into your school to complete these projects? Is that
absolutely? You got it.
Awesome.
100%. Now, it's not the way that technical apprenticeships usually work. So usually what happens is a company sponsors it. So probably the more famous ones are Lyft has an apprenticeship program. Microsoft has one called Leap. Twilio has one that's pretty famous. And so those organizations, they see the intrinsic value in this. And so they're willing to pilot and create these programs and try these out. They're not a major source of talent for the organizations, but they're at least sort of proving the model, right? And giving some people an opportunity. And so usually it's a big corporation with tons of resources. It's not usually hey, it's Mike, I'm going to start an apprenticeship, right? And then I have to kind of go out and find these corporate partners. But what I just knew in San Diego was we don't have any of these really big size organizations in San Diego. most of ours are like mid-market organizations that aren't at the point where they have like, the Microsoft cash flow to be able to try novel programs like this. So we're sort of like trying to prove it and then show it to people and be like, here, you can do it too, right? And give them a playbook that they could use to start having like a bunch of these crop up everywhere.
Wow, that's amazing. And this is, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but because of the nature of what it is that you do, this is something that can be completely remote, right? You could bring on a company in Maine or Michigan or whatever and have that and have them feed you projects, that your apprentices work on.
Absolutely. So right now, our apprentices themselves have to reside in California. So we have a registered program. So we're registered with the state of California Department of Apprenticeship Standards. And what that means is we can operate here in California, but our companies can be anywhere in the world. So right now we have a couple partner companies, and they're worldwide organizations. So they have a presence in California, but they're big. So.
Okay, very cool. We're gonna have a conversation after this show. You got my gears turning,
Nice.
buddy.
Nice.
You definitely do. And this is all really amazing stuff. And I really hope that my listeners are taking a lot away from this, because this is very, very important information, especially in this day and age of technology, and all of this, everything that's going on with colleges and things like that right now due to COVID. I mean, there's a lot to consider in here as far as benefits go and as far as opportunity is concerned. This is incredibly intriguing, and I'm just I'm blown away, honestly, by a lot of it.
Yeah, I mean, and I get that a lot, and it's usually like, especially on the website, when people come to the website and they're just like, the first thing they put in the chat boxes are like, how much does this cost? Like, it's free. We don't charge anything. Like, you get paid. Like, no, really, what's the strings? Like, they just cannot believe it. They're just like, well, and the limiting factor obviously is I can't hire everybody. Like, I don't have an unscalable capacity. We have to like open up our admissions when we have enough partners that will allow us to help work on things. So, I mean, my hope is that eventually it won't just be us doing this. It'll be everybody that does this, because they'll see the merit in it, and it'll just be so common that I can't even do this as a business, because people are just like, everybody's doing this, so there's no value in what you're doing, Mike. It's not very unique. So that's the day I want to get to. I want to get to the point where, we can, there's a ton of other things I can work on. I'm a software engineer. So.
Well put, well said. No, that's awesome. And I've got just one more question for you before we wrap up today. And it's something I love to ask everybody, and I'm excited to hear your answer. We talked a little bit more before about success and how people define success differently. And I'm interested in you, Mike, and how you define success in what you do.
Sure. So I think I've already gotten there. I mean, I'm patting myself on the back a little bit here, but I mean, when I do team, we do sort of like an all hands meeting every day. And part of the reason why I do it is because it is just amazing to be able to see 10 faces and know the story behind each one of those 10 that are now enabled to have this career that they otherwise would not have had. And so in my opinion, as long as we continue to sustain this and I can continue to keep people working every single day, that's a win for me. That's a W, because it really is just amazing to be able to, like, when someone says, hey, I'm not feeling well, can I take the day off? I'm like, yes, take the day off. Or when I get to like pick holidays and be like, we're going to make MLK a holiday. Everybody gets the day off, right? That's my like success, is I'm creating a work environment for people where they get to work and learn and earn. And so do I want to do this 10 times over and have like way more people? Sure. Would I be happier with like enough money where I could buy, a Bentley? Sure. Like, those things aren't bad. But it does feel like we're there. As long as I can keep doing this, every day is a win. Every day is success.
That's fantastic. What a great answer. And it falls so well in line, with the things I usually talk about. That's a very common answer I get, is the ability, in short, in a nutshell, the ability to help people. Right. And and that's an awesome thing. And it just goes to show what can be accomplished, in this particular trajectory. So, Mike, why don't you tell people where they can find you?
Absolutely. So the way you can reach San Diego Code School, the web is the quickest way. We do have physical campuses, but sdcs.io is our website. I also have a podcast, so I'll give a quick shout out and plug to my podcast. We talk about attracting and retaining talent. So I think I have some really interesting conversations. We release an episode a day. It's called the Snack Walls podcast. So you can check it out on any of the major podcast listening platforms. So yeah, I'd love to connect with folks. Anybody that thinks that they'd love to be a guest on the podcast, hit me up. Always looking for guests.
Awesome. Mike Roberts, paving the way for new collar jobs. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks again, Josh. I appreciate it.